So today we're going to dive deep in one of the most iconic instruments in electronic music, the TB-303. The TB-303 was designed by Roland to simulate a bass guitar. However, it was a commercial failure and was shortly discontinued in 1984. In the late 80s and early 90s, techno producers from Detroit as well as in Chicago acquired second-hand versions of the 303 and they started to use it in a completely new way. They drove the parameters to create this squeaky, chirpy sound that we now refer to as acid. Popular acid house tracks included Future's Acid Tracks, Substance by Richie Houghton, DJ Pierre's Box Energy, and one song I grew up with, Josh Wink's Higher State of Consciousness. There's just something about that squeaky sound that made you feel euphoric when you heard it on the dance floor. And recently, the 303 sound has resurfaced in drum and bass in Dimension's track Offender. So today, I'm going to show you how to get that 303 sound with completely free VSTs. Because who doesn't like making music without spending a dime? And then I'm going to show you how to do it with Roland's official version of their 303 emulator. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, but more on this later. By the way, my name is Stranger, and if you're looking to improve your music production and sound design, especially with dance music and drum and bass, then this channel is for you. So today we're going to be showing you how to use the 303 and recreate a Fender as well as some classic 303 bass lines. So comment down below and let me know, are you all about the old school or new school? I'm providing all of the MIDI patterns today for free down in the link below. All I ask of you is to hit the like button, subscribe, and share my videos. Alright, without further ado, let's get right into it. So there's tons of 303 emulators out there, but the best one that I found that was for free was by a company called Use, and it's called the BL303. In terms of a free VST, I thought this was the closest in terms of sound to the original TB-303. By the way, you can also recreate the 303 sound with virtually any synthesizer, but I'll let you guys figure that out. I think the emulators have something special to it though. They do something with the filters to make it sound a little more authentic. So here's the BL303 and I'll just play it for you. And it just has a handful of parameters. You have the cutoff. The emphasis is pretty much the resonance, how squeaky it sounds. And then there's a filter envelope, and there's really only one parameter for the envelope, which is the decay, and that's how long it takes for the envelope to go from the maximum mod amount set by the envelope mod control here to the filter cutoff setting. So the higher the setting, the longer it takes to decay. And the accent is a parameter that is specific to the 303. Basically, you can set certain notes to have an accent. And pretty much what the accent does is it boosts the resonance for some really interesting nuances, which is specific to the 303. And it's one of the things I love about the 303 is all those minute nuances. So you won't hear this until you program in some notes. And true to the 303, you can choose between a square wave and a sawtooth. Generally, I like the square wave. I just like how it sounds a little more nasal, but that's really up to you. And of course, there's the tuning, but I wouldn't play with that. I just want it at regular tuning. Now, to get it to sound like that hard acid sound, you have to add some distortion to the 303. Now I have a couple free VSTs here to recreate the sound. So what I have here is WaveArt's Tube Saturator Vintage, and for a free VST, this is actually really impressive. It has a really analog and warm sounding drive to it. And then for a little more grit, I added another layer of saturation, and this is also a free VST I just learned of recently. It's by Tritech. It's called Crush, and it has a drive and then a bit crusher. So that gives it a really nitty-gritty sound. Now I also added some EQing to bring up the mids and highs. So before the EQ it sounded like this. I just wanted something to sound a little more present, so I boosted the mids and highs. And then finally, I added a delay reverb effect. And again, this is a free VST. It's by Valhalla. It's got super massive, and you can grab it down in the links below. This is a really dope reverb delay effect. And really can't believe it's free. It's really nice sounding. So lots of free VSTs here for you guys today. And really want to show you how to do these sounds without having to pay a cent. To get to the dimension offender pattern, there's a couple different melodies and rhythms to learn here first. And these are fundamental rhythms that are found in music. This one is inspired by disco music, and I call it the galloping rhythm. You may have seen it in previous videos. This rhythm can be found in various sounds, from like hi-hats to bass lines to snares and kick drums. So what you do, if you have a bar here, these are all 16th notes. You set a note here and then a double note here. Notice there's a space between the notes here, and this creates the galloping effect that goes boom, boom, boom. So we take that and just duplicate it across the bar. You get that galloping effect, boom, 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 boom. And to make it sound a little more funky, then you can sharpen the galloping notes, specifically the double notes here, by shortening it. This is especially useful and funky when you're doing it to a 303 sound. Then the next pattern to learn I call the quadruple hit. And again, this rhythm is found all over music. And to do the quadruple hit, it's 3 hits here and then a 4th hit here. So you get that boom, 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 and just duplicate it across the bar like that. Notice it also has a kind of galloping effect. And again, to tighten up the notes and give it a little more funk, we can shorten these 2 notes here. And then we can lengthen this one here. We can make this one a little bit longer like that. So to get to the offender type melody, we change the last note of the pattern to a higher note. And sometimes we can move it an octave up like this. But what offender does is he plays a D sharp here. And by the way, I think we're working in the scale of F minor. Okay, so we're getting close. The next step is just to duplicate this pattern. So it's a 2-bar pattern. And then change the last note to an F. And then the very first section, we're going to augment it, and we're going to do something like this, where we play a longer note, bring this back down here. Now we can shorten this note here so there's a little more of a rhythm here. Now to add a little more funk to the pattern, we can add an additional final note to the end of the phrase. We can add a D sharp, a low D sharp here. And that's pretty much the melody for offender. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some accents and glides to create those nuances that are true to the 303 that make it special. So the way the BL303 works is that there are programmed actions in the velocity settings. So if you want a glide in a note, you have to set the velocity to between 0 and 5. So we're going to make the F2 glide to D sharp 1. And to do that, we're going to bring the velocity down to 1. Now just make sure the velocities of all the other notes are at 100. 100 means it plays a regular note. This is very finicky about the BL303. If you're using the glide function, you got to make the notes a bit shorter so that they're not legato, meaning they're not touching each other. Otherwise, the succeeding notes may not play. So notice how funky that sounds with the glide. Now we can add some more funk to it if we like. We can add it here and here. Just replace that D sharp 2 with a low velocity. So just highlight these two notes and then bring the velocity down. And again, just make sure it's a short note. Now let me add some reverb to give it some spice. Then I have this beat here. Now, by the way, I am playing this at 130 beats per minute. I just find when you're programming this, it might help, especially if you're just learning to program it at a slower tempo so you can really feel the rhythm. But I have a 4/4 kick here. And then I have a sawtooth bass here with an accented note on the second bar here to give it some funk. And it's playing on the offbeat in between the kicks. And then you play that together with the kick, you get that disco kind of vibe. And then let's introduce the BL303. Let's speed this up to drum and bass tempo at 170 beats per minute. Now what gives this 303 that euphoric sound is modulating the parameters to kind of create a climax. So to do that, we can play with the cutoff as well as the emphasis and envelope mod settings, and you could either record yourself performing these changes or you could automate it. As you can see, this could be endless hours of fun. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. If you're a beginner and you want to learn the basics of Ableton and drum programming, then you can check out my Ableton Essential Exercises on Skillshare. I have 3 levels of classes where you'll learn the basics of house, funk, hip hop, drum and bass, and even dubstep. And I will be working on a new class on bass lines, so stay posted. For those that don't know, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes to help you expand on your creativity and passions. In addition to my classes, there's tons of really good music production classes on there, as well as classes on music theory, graphic design, and marketing. All skills which are important today for an independent musician. The benefit of Skillshare is that there are no ads and it costs less than $10 on an annual membership. The first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will receive a free trial of their premium membership. So check it out and I'll see you at my class on Skillshare. So now that you've learned some basic building blocks on how to build a 303 bass line, let's use these concepts to build our own bass line. So I have the galloping pattern here. I'm just going to take out the last beat here and we'll make it a longer note. So let's go for maybe a D sharp, and then that will glide to a lower D sharp. Of course, let's bring the velocity down so it glides. let's extend the pattern to 2 bars. And this time we're going to employ the quadruple hit pattern. So the quadruple hit is a triple hit followed by a longer 4th hit like that. And we can duplicate that. And then instead of the F, we can replace these longer F notes with another note. Maybe we can bring it down to a C sharp here, and this one can be a C. And I'm just going to set this to an F, and this a D sharp. Doesn't that sound badass? Let's hear Over the Beat. Again, endless hours of fun. Now I'm going out on a limb here, but let me know, which melody do you like more, Dimensions or mine? But with all due respect, big up Dimension. If you're listening, you're a beast and love your music. All right, so we have a completely different pattern here, and this goes out to all the old school heads. Let me know if you recognize this. And that's right, that's Josh Wink's Higher State of Consciousness. I have a think break here so we can recreate the vibe. So all I'm doing there is just performing the cutoff by just spinning the knob up and down, and then you get that squeaky, chirpy kind of vibe. And once again, going out to all the old school heads, that was Josh Wink's Higher State of Consciousness. Well, my rendition of it. So Roland has an awesome subscription service called Roland Cloud, which gives you access to over 50 of their virtual instruments, as well as a huge library of presets. And Roland has their own remake of the TB-303 as a VST. And coming from the manufacturer themselves, you have to expect near perfect, if not perfect, representation of the 303. So Roland gave me access to their cloud service, and I was happy to get my hands on their 303 VST. There's something very authentic sounding with this one. Something about how the filters and the distortion sounds, as well as the accent and all those minute nuances, just make it really gritty and just like the real 303. Not to say that the BL 303 isn't close, but there is something about this one that has a bit of an edge. So here's Roland's version of their 303. Now, just like the hardware version, there is a step sequencer. Now, you can program the 303 with a traditional MIDI key roll. I just think it'd be a good lesson to walk you through on how to use a step sequencer. I think it's a good skill to have because once you learn it, then you can use an actual hardware step sequencer. So the bottom panel here is the step sequencer, and it's limited to 16 steps. And by default, it represents 1 bar. Now, to enter notes, you simply enable the notes by clicking on them on the bottom here. Now, if you right click and drag, you can enable multiple notes. Also, if you want long notes, then you use the slide function to join the next note. Notice you don't need to enter the slide on the last note since there's no note after it to join. And then the accent adds a bit of a resonance boost to create a bit of a cool nuance to the sound. It's one of the things that I love about the 303, the sound of the accent. Now to change notes, you have to find a note on the keyboard here and then click on it. So let's say we want the note F2, then this would be F2. Now if you right click on the note, it'll enter the note and then move to the next note. Now the problem with the step sequencer with this setting is that it is limited to a certain length. So we can't make it shorter like how we did in the MIDI notes to get that really funky sound. So to do that, you would then have to change the scale of the sequencer. Instead of 1/16 to show 1/32. So before, with this 1/16 setting, each step represented 1/16. However, if you click to 132, now every step represents a 30-second note. And consequently, this section will then represent 2 beats instead of 1 bar or 4 beats. So now it plays faster. So now that you know the basics of how to use this sequencer, we can program the offender pattern here. So the offender melody starts with an F2. So let's enter F, and it's a long note, so we're going to write it all the way across like that. And then there's a shorter note over here. And again, it's an F2, like that. Now we have to join the notes. So that's the first 2 beats of the melody. Then we'll work on the next 2. So the way the sequencer works is you have a pattern and you have 8 different variations. So right now we're editing the variation number 3. Now to play the variation, you have to enter it up here. So just make sure 3 is enabled here. And then by clicking on these buttons down here, it allows you to edit that specific variation. So we're editing number 3 right now. And then the next 2 beats plays that quadruple hit, again with the F note. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, and then it plays a long note here. And this actually goes up to a D sharp. And then we make the last 2 notes longer. So like that. Like that. Of course, join the notes. And then we can bring this last note back down to an F2 for that glide. Finally, we can add an accent on the very last note for that little bit of nuance. And then the next 2 beats is the exact same thing. So what you can do is copy the pattern on number 4, go to number 5, and then just paste it. And then the last 2 beats is the exact same thing except the note changes. So again, we're going to paste the pattern and then shift the last note up to an F3. So actually at the very end, there's a low D sharp. Like that. And then to play the 3 variations one after the other in the step sequencer, you click on the first pattern, which is number 3, and then hold shift and click on these successive patterns, 4, 5, and 6. And now when you play it, it'll play it one after the other. Maybe an accent would sound good at this very last note. Bring it up to 170 beats per minute. Now up at the very top here, there's a panel. If you click on it, it reveals the effects section. So there's a distortion and then there's a delay, which is all pretty self-explanatory. So let's increase the delay. And then here's where you can play with the cutoff, resonance, envelope, modulation amount, and the decay. This is the accent amount when we play those accent notes. There's actually this really cool condition knob. So if you increase it, it kind of ages the 303. So the hardware 303, as it ages, there's subtle variations in the pitching and the filter because it is an analog piece of gear. So to emulate that, you can increase the condition. Notice it sounds a little more muffled when the condition knob is up. Now finally, if you like the patterns, you can actually click and drag it into MIDI. So you can click here and drag it into a MIDI clip. You could also drag it into audio, which then bounces pattern down as audio. Now if you're using MIDI, then make sure you uncheck this position lock to DAW. Otherwise, every time you hit play on your DAW, it's going to trigger the step sequencer. So uncheck the position lock to DAW, and then you can play the MIDI. However, I'm just going to keep it on with the step sequencer, and let's hear it with the beat. Okay, so now on to the important question. Which one sounds better to you? The Roland 303 or the BL 303? Let's check and then let me know. Alright, so comment down below and let me know which one sounds best to you. Alright, one more pattern for the old school heads. Let me know if you recognize this one. And yes, that's correct. That's DJ Reality's Detroit Blues on Renegade hardware. Shouts out to Clayton and crew. This is the pattern for it. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this, and whether you use Roland's version or the free version of the 303, as you can see, it's a super fun sound to play with. And a unique character of the 303 makes it a good addition to your artillery of sound. Now that you've learned how to program a 303, maybe you'd be interested in using a hardware version. And actually Roland as well as Behringer has hardware remakes of the 303 at an affordable price. By the way, if you want to support me, you can grab my gnarly serum pack, which contains 190 face-melting bass sounds. I designed this so that it's likely the only pack you'll ever need, at least for a while. But if you're not ready yet, you can pick up my free serum pack as well as my free sample pack. Anyways, that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Keep practicing. I'll see you at the next video.